Donald Trump has done it. 2 weeks of prevarication, misdirection, uncertain diplomacy. He sent B-2 bombers, a fleet of aircraft, Tomahawk missile sent from submarines in the region, over to Iran to destroy 3 nuclear facilities. Lee, I want to ask you about what this means for the second Trump presidency. It seems to me to be one of the most seismic moments in the short history we've had so far. It's an exercise of withering American power. How do you see it? How do we fit it in that short history since January?
As I like to quote the Yiddish proverb, a fool can throw a stone in the water that it takes 10 wise men to retrieve. Trump, he acts so impulsively
Yeah.
that it's hard to make sense of anything that he does in a stream of cause and effect. It's not clear why he did this. Clearly, he didn't want to do this. He seemed to not want to do this. He warned Netanyahu. He seemed on the verge of negotiating. It could be that he just decided to pile on because of his machismo, because he saw how successful Netanyahu was being. And certainly, it's a very somber moment to take a country into war, right?
Yeah.
He thanked Netanyahu for being part of the team.
Yeah.
And said, God bless Israel, even before he said, at the end, before he said, God bless America. So it's not clear what his intentions are, or even if they're visible to himself. What is clear is that this is indeed seismic. And what is curious to me is that first you have the 3 actors in this are all autocrats.
Mm.
Netanyahu, Khamenei, and Trump. You've never had an American who was as undemocratic as Trump leading the country into war. And the second thing that's odd is that Iran now holds all the cards, doesn't it? Everyone is waiting with bated breath on the edge of their seats to see how Iran will respond. In a sense, Iran has nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that they do, and if they do nothing, that in itself is kind of a power play.
Yeah, I
But
mean, as the line goes, it's very easy to start a war and very hard to end one. I mean, these
right,
situations quickly, obviously, get out of control. I mean, it's interesting what you were saying about the justification for why Trump has done this, because all he's really said in the past 2 or 3 weeks is that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, which is something that we've been hearing for decades from countries all around the world. So what has changed? What was the material thing that changed? It seems that Israel took it upon itself to launch this attack on Iran in order to decapitate the regime and to break their ability to attack Israel. And then Trump said in a meeting with Netanyahu in May, which the New York Times reported, that he was trying to get Netanyahu to back down, to say, look, I've got these negotiations going on. If you go and attack, if you go and literally kill the chief negotiator on the Iranian side, then you're obviously going to jeopardize those negotiations. So it seems to me as if that Netanyahu has got his way, and Trump, in order to save face, essentially, has followed where Netanyahu has led.
he's followed where Netanyahu has led. He's given a tremendous opening to Putin to do what he wants in Ukraine. There are now 10,000 Russian troops moving forward in Kursk. Putin's made gains over the last 2 months. He's given Netanyahu a free hand in Gaza. The Israelis are killing dozens of Palestinians a day. All the promises he made, vows to end these conflicts that he made on day one, et cetera, have not only come to fruition, they've disappeared from the public mind. So not only has he gotten America onto the verge of a quagmire in Iran, but he's created new openings for America's adversaries and shut down any hope of a liberal democratic arc through
Yeah.
the world that, at its best, America traced for the rest of the world. Bush's rhetoric in the lead up to the Iraq War and during the first weeks and months of it was infuriating. and yet I find myself longing for it.
Mm.
I would like to be lied to prettily, even, in the name of ideals that I know are being soiled and
Yeah.
trampled upon, than to be told that we are in a war now for no good reason. That, as you pointed out, just saying that we have stopped them from building a nuclear weapon, that's no reason at all. We don't know what the extent of the damage is. We don't know if they have other nuclear facilities. We don't know if we'll have to bomb them again in 2 or 3 years. There is nothing, I think, that was gained by this, except to yet again open the possibility for a smaller power to do a rope-a-dope on America. You remember what the rope-a-dope, what
Mhm.
Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope was. America was rope-a-doped in Vietnam. America was rope-a-doped in Iraq. America could well get rope-a-doped here. It's much easier to bring down a muscle-bound giant, isn't it? Especially if it has no brain,
Mhm.
than it is to deal with a wily adversary.
Yeah, I think the Iraq War is an interesting comparison because obviously Colin Powell got enlisted and sent off by Bush to plead with the Security Council, and that was partly because Tony Blair and the Brits were urging them to try and retain some remnant of international credibility and legitimacy. And
Right,
it almost feels quaint to say, but just to note how far U.S. concern, and there have always been large parts of the American public mind that have been skeptical of all international institutions, whether it's the ICC or the UN. But to just track and to pause for a moment and just think how far the American upper echelon has gone from thinking that we need any legitimacy or any credence from the international community. I mean, Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, was essentially exiled to the UN because Trump sees it as so unimportant nowadays. I mean, can we talk a little bit more about this justification? It seems to me that Trump very much sees the commander-in-chief role as an individual role. Obviously, constitutionally, American presidents can essentially do what they want when it comes
right.
to the military. But he
That's
seems
right.
to he seems to embody that in a way that he doesn't think there needs to be any democratic justification for that. He doesn't even try, which I find very interesting. It seems that his egotism and his nationalism come into conflict, and he just goes, "I don't even need public support for this." The whole point of the past 2 weeks was, as he said, "I may do it, I may not do it." Not shall we build a coalition, not with the UN, but even just within America itself. He didn't do that at all. It was all about himself.
No, that's right. I mean, America's famed rugged individualism has now morphed into a rugged solipsism, and
Yeah,
maybe even maybe a fragile solipsism, because this is a man who also is very thin-skinned and has a fragile ego and is well aware of the accusations of taco and
yeah.
all of that. But I think the one
Just explain what taco is, Lee.
Trump. Oh, it was coined by a Financial Times columnist in reference to the way Trump is constantly backing off from his tariffs, and it stands for Trump always chickens out. And when a
Yeah.
reporter brought that up a few weeks ago at a press conference, Trump became enraged.
Mm.
This is all a psychodrama, as you pointed out as you pointed out in your piece today, in his own head. But I think it's important to see, to realize that part of the genius, as it were, of Trump's stupidity, acting impulsively, like a blind man in the room, being harried by an unseen person, uh, 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 or blindfolded, touched here and there, and swirling around trying to find who it is. Trump is able to force the American public and the world to approach everything he does in isolation from everything else he does.
Mm.
But remember, just what, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, he overrode the California governor and sent in not just the National Guard, but the Marines into LA when there was no good reason to do that. The disturbances, they weren't even riots, were limited to a few small blocks
Yeah.
in LA. And there was so what he's done here, really, is, in a sense, to expand what he did in LA. In his mind, he's sending in the National Guard.
Mhm.
He's sending the National Guard. He's overriding the head of another state and his own government, and he's sending in the National Guard in the form of the American military into Iran, to put down a menace that could well have been managed through negotiations, through carrots and sticks, through all the threats and bluffs and concessions that are part of a negotiation.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think we have to see uh, militarism as connected both abroad and at home. And it's interesting that America First was supposed to break that link, or no, or at least recognize the link and therefore break the causality between the two by saying if we keep sending troops abroad, if we keep sending these working class men and women abroad, well, that means that we can't help them in their communities in Pennsylvania or the Midwest or wherever it might be. And there's such a large part of the coalition around Trump who were sold on that idea. And I think that the populism in the MAGA movement is butting up against Trump's undemocratic, autocratic inclination. The two don't seem to always be able to go together because if Trump is always has to be able to act on his impulse, whether it's to save face or whether it is to expand his power abroad, then that's going to frustrate these populist American first policy objectives. And another thing I want to ask you about, Lee, is the connection between the emergency at home and the emergency abroad, because it's very important, I think, for Trump to be able to expand his power domestically to say that there is an emergency, right?
yes, right.
Interestingly, he doesn't seem to be adopting too much of that rhetoric at the moment. And maybe it's part of a broader play. I don't know, but it's not like he's saying we are at war. We've got to have emergency measures. It seems also a bit more scattergun.
I think it goes without saying that we're in an emergency in a sense. He's created an emergency. He doesn't need to give it a name.
Right.
But let me go back to what you said about populism, about the clash between the America First and Trump's ego-driven military interventions. Isn't that part of populism also? Isn't populism also impulsive, irrational? Bullying. I'm not so sure they're irreconcilable on the one hand, and on the other, I do think that it perhaps too much is made between this ideological split
Yeah.
in MAGA. Yeah, sure, Tucker Carlson, Ted Cruz, Vance, all these, they're prominent people who think policy. They're prominent policymakers. They think, if you want to call it that, but the rank and file, the legions of Trump supporters, they're not thinking their way through this. Part of the pleasures of populism is to act impulsively, right?
Maybe.
Andrew Jackson was admired because of his temper,
Mm.
probably even more than for his policies. And I think Trump is admired for his personality. And if that personality seems to butt up against MAGA principles of America First and isolationism, so be it. Personality comes first. That's what people identify with. That's
Maybe I think that's I think that's right, and I think that, but I still think there is a tension between trying to shift the focus domestically, and you might call that populism, or you might just call it isolationism. I
right.
think populism, in part, is about recognizing the disconnect between the Washington foreign policy elites, who many people blame for American adventurism over the past 20, 30 years,
Right.
and saying that those priorities have to be shifted back home. I think that you can separate that out just from the irrational, impulsive ego mania of Donald Trump. I think there are certain people within the movement who have made that connection and are extremely frustrated right now that Donald Trump is being dragged into a war, and they do see a contradiction there. Having said that, Trump comes first. That was quite clear with J.D. Vance, and Steve Bannon has said something similar. We will go with whatever the president does, but that does
Right.
not mean, I think, that they're inside, and also a week ago, that they're saying that they're very frustrated because they see the two policy ends as incompatible.
Yes, no, I do think that's true, but I do think that in the end, the MAGA movement will go where Trump leads, and I think that if there is a split, if a consequential split in the movement, it will come from an emotional source. American soldiers will die. or
Yeah.
American citizens will die. When it comes home in the way that the wars in Vietnam and Iraq came home, which were really clearinghouses for for towns that were disintegrating in the first place, right? All these young men who couldn't find a place in the new economy were sent off to the Moloch,
Mm.
were fed to the Molochs in Vietnam and Iraq. And if and when that happens now, that's when the split will become something more than speculative, ideological, where it will become consequential and part of the street, as it were.
What do you think about the argument that this is a one-off? I mean, that's the plan. The plan is, as you put in your piece, the plan is to blow them up, stay in the air, not commit any ground troops, hope that the Iranian regime is so demobilized and decimated that they can't mount a proper response. What do you think about that argument?
It could happen. There's a
Yeah,
lot of projection with regard to Trump. A lot of people, even I fall into this, want to see this as the jumping off a precipice into a war. It's ironic. People are talking about how this might lead to regime change in Iran. I think a lot of people are hoping that this might lead to regime change at home. Right,
right.
and you're right.
In
It
what
could be a
sense? In
one-off.
what sense?
Well, if we do get involved in a war, if Americans are killed, if Americans are dragged in, if the MAGA supporters feel that once again they're losing their status, their lives
Yeah.
to foreign policy elites, even if they're MAGA elites, they will convulse. And in 2026, Trump will lose the House. He'll be immediately impeached, and that's the end. That's the end of Trumpism in that stage of it anyway. But
Yeah.
yes, this could be a one. It could work. This new the Israelis showed perhaps that you can wage a new kind of war strictly from the air, which for some reason Putin decided not to do in Ukraine. One wonders if Putin had simply decided to rain bombs and missiles down on Kiev.
Yeah, I think Adam Tooze made a good point the other day about how the Ukrainian and Russian air forces were much better matched. So it was impossible for Putin to exercise total control over Ukrainian airspace in the same way it was in the same way that Israel was able to do so
Yes,
over
there you
Iran.
go. It could work. But again, we have to be certain that these nuclear sites were taken out. What if Iran comes up with a dirty bomb?
Mm.
They're willing to do anything now. They're desperate and enraged. The regime is clinging to power. The supreme leader is 86 years old. He has nothing to lose, really. What if someone were to infiltrate and set off a dirty bomb somewhere in Israel? It's hard to see this as being a successful one-off operation without some kind of consequential result, some
Yeah.
kind of consequential effect.
I want to ask you a little bit about the domestic politics and how the Democrats fit into this.
Yeah,
The anti-war aspect of the party has so far been mostly confined to the progressive wing. You've had Bernie Sanders propose a Stop the War Act in the Senate. One of the leading anti-war figures has become Ro Khanna. I spoke to Congressman Khanna on Thursday night, and he was telling me that this is a time for the party to unite. This is a way in which they can make that link. They can actually make that left populist argument that we were talking about earlier and reclaim a bit of ground from Donald Trump. Donald Trump has dominated the anti-war position for nearly a decade now. He was
right.
able to point at the Democrats and say, "You're the party of war. You're the party that has sent everyone abroad. You're the party that has led to this huge debt."
Right.
And now that maybe there's a chink there in his armor that they can make some hay from.
Let's hope they do. We've had the predictable toothless response from Schumer,
Yeah,
who has to seem to struggle with his face to remove a smile from it when he talks, and the smile immediately snaps back on
yeah,
for the cameras. Hakeem Jeffries made a strong statement, but it was just a statement. I don't know what the Democrats are going to do. I think really that the response has to come from civil society.
mm,
They the Democrats were just on the verge of finding their cause, right? The left had civil rights, and then it had Vietnam, and it was able to bundle all these other causes around to those unifying occasions.
In the
So
'60s.
in the '60s and then
Yeah,
in the '70s,
yeah.
and they were just on the verge of rallying around immigration, which would have been beautiful, right? It would have returned them to their tolerant cosmopolitan values and back to what to American principles. That's all been blasted to smithereens now. So now they have to regroup. Can they rally around a war now? Can they oppose Trump on those grounds? I don't think it's going to be very convincing to people to point out how hypocritical Trump is, because Trump, he's beyond hypocritical. I mean,
Yeah.
this man says 10 different things at the same time, and not out of strategy, but simply because he's scatterbrained. He's
Mm.
flying by the seat of his pants. That's what's so hard about opposing him. But yes, I don't have much hope for Democratic figures in Congress.
No.
I do hope that civil society erupts against this, and that there will be the
Yeah.
same kind of demonstrations against this war as there were against the ICE raids.
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, it does seem to me that the only part of the party that's been energized since the election, and I don't just mean in the past week or so, I mean in the past 6 months or however long it's been, has been that progressive side of things. Chuck Schumer, the leader in the Senate, the Democratic leader in the Senate, as you said, and his counterpart in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, they've been quite happy to sort of wait for Trump to stumble, and they think that's a good strategy for the midterms. I mean, it seems to me that the left need to realize in some form that we live in a populist age, and maybe you reject that definition of populism. Maybe we could reframe it. But I think this idea of left populism is increasingly popular in certain aspects of the party, and there are lots of people who recognize that given Sanders' age, his elderly age, he's not going to be able to, or we don't know, let's see, but he's probably not going to be able to run next time. And there does
No.
seem to be this jostling within the party, and the only vitality, the only real opposition to Trump is coming from that part. I mean, is could this serve as a pivot for the Democrats? Could this serve as a moment where they recognize the power of some of these arguments, where they try and take what Trump was right about in some form and apply it with some of these American values that you were just talking about?
I think they could. Trump and his people are very good at flipping things around, and
Yeah.
he'll immediately call them anti-patriotic and communists and all kinds of stuff. They're very afraid of that, especially American liberal politicians. If the country's at war, if Americans are dying, it's dicey. It's very dangerous to oppose him right at the beginning, because you do incur charges of anti-patriotism. He's made those before, right? He didn't even tell the
Mm,
Democrats about this strike. He told the Republicans.
mm,
That's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. If he's going it alone, in a sense, just only out of his own side, he's also going it just with his wing of the party. He's usually presidents try to unite. That's not what these remarks were on Saturday night. This was not uniting the country. This was simply announcing to the country that he'd made a kind of deal, and this is what the deal was. And then he threw in God at the end, which made him sound more like an Ayatollah than anything else. In fact, Hegseth just said, "Glory to God." It's very strange. It's the whole thing's very, so they're constantly mirroring their opponents. As far as populism, no, I agree with you. We're in a populist moment. I think it's more emotional and more irrational
right.
than anything else. And where does it go? Does it, it started off with Sanders, of course, with universal health care, and higher wages. It started off in a sort of a kind of an old left framework. Then it got all tangled up in DEI and pushed to the side by DEI. Now it's back again and scrambling for some traction.
Mm.
It seems that the concrete issues of wages and universal health, they're not on anyone's lips now. Can they get it going with the war? Remember, the anti-war movement, it gained its momentum because it picked up other causes, right? Poverty in the inner cities, racism, and then gradually gay rights. It encompassed all these other broad, progressive values. Can just an anti-war message, can that win over the American public? if the country is indeed, at war, if the country is indeed struck by terrorist attacks. I don't know that. I don't know. The left was completely crippled by 9/11, of course. How could you respond? How could you respond to those attacks, other than adopting a patriotic line? Some people did, but it wasn't convincing until it was clear that Iraq was a catastrophe. I don't know if anti-war, to put it bluntly, is enough to rally around for the left. I just don't know.